Hello and welcome to another episode of Nothing Ventured with me, Arish Shah. Today in the studio with me, I have Jess Butcher MBE. She is a tech entrepreneur turned social campaigner. She co-founded Blippar, early AR pioneer with over $100 million raised, and later served as an EHRC commissioner and held policy and comms roles at Sweatcoin. Today she runs Scrollaware, less scroll, more soul, a not-for-profit pushing a cultural reset on the attention economy. She is a 3 times TEDx speaker and a regular commentator on tech addiction, polarization, and the decline of community. In today's episode, we talk about how Shazam was the ear of the phone and how Blippar tried to be the eyes of the phone, but how she now thinks about how to remove the phone from the loop.
I actually didn't want to put the phone between us and our real world experience unless there was real value in doing so.
How she moved from poacher to gamekeeper in the world of tech, and how democratizing access turned into capturing attention, which has now turned into feeding addiction.
It is not an attention economy anymore, it is an addiction economy.
How society is perpetually overwhelmed and constantly distracted, and whether we are seeing the lobotomization of a generation.
What we're effectively doing is turning a whole generation into non-playing characters.
How you can't just remove the tech, you have to provide the alternative, and how we get to less scroll, more soul.
My slogan is less scroll, more soul.
Let's get into it. Hi there, whilst I've got you for a second, I thought I'd just reintroduce myself. My name's Arish, I'm the host of Nothing Ventured, the podcast where I talk to the people behind the stories that make the tech and venture ecosystem go round. I'm also the founder of Emerge One, a consultancy that provides fractional CFO support to venture-backed tech startups from seed to Series B and beyond. If you enjoy the podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could like, comment, and subscribe wherever it is that you listen. And of course, if you do want to have a conversation about any of the guests we've had on, or indeed want to suggest someone to come on the pod, do reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter X. I'm always up for a conversation. Right, let's get straight back into it. Jess, really wonderful to have you here in the studio with me. Thank you so much for coming in and you know, essentially having to drive through the challenging rain this awful grey December afternoon in London. But yeah, thank you so much for being here today.
I love being here. Thank you.
Amazing. Well, look, we're going to get straight into it. So you, of course, were one of the founders of Blippar, and Blippar rode the first AR, augmented reality wave. With hindsight, do you think that AR underdelivered because of the use case, because of distribution, or because of misaligned incentives? And if you were launching in today's kind of Vision Pro meets Gen AI world, what would you have built differently, and what are the mistakes that you still see founders potentially making?
I think AR remains a very valid and important tool, and part of the toolkit that many different industries can employ to huge effect and huge gain. And I think we're seeing some wonderful applications of AR and image recognition. I put the computer vision, I would couple those things together because that was very much what Blippar was about. The computer vision was actually the more pertinent technology, and AR was just a content delivery format. I think with hindsight, one of the mistakes we made is in thinking that we could be a consumer lens that would house all of that and a direct-to-consumer proposition in its own right, whereas it was what the AR was doing that was always much more interesting. And what Blippar ultimately gifted to the world was a huge amount of rapid R&D and testing, which the world went on to build upon further. You know, so we were the precursor to things like Google Glass, you know, and to a lot of educational and industry applications. And some of the businesses that have come out of that early team, indeed, my co-founder has gone on to build a business that uses that technology within recycling and refuse. Wow. So looking at garbage ultimately and being able to recognize which elements of it are recyclable or not, which is saving, you know, billions in that industry. So that was always the power, I think, to understand the really deep. What we were doing was hacking our way into market by testing so many different things, and in the hope that we could build a verbified behavior there. So to blip was what we wanted to build, in the same way that you would Shazam. You know, I think we falsely saw these parallels with Shazam being the ear of the phone and us being the eye of the phone. Whereas in actual fact, that, you know, the applications for the AR, I think, were always going to be much deeper and have their own individual use cases. There wasn't really a lot of sense in all of those applications and very different use cases sitting within one single app, in the way that it did make sense for Shazam, because it was, you know, being able to identify music.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of things that come out of that, right? So one of our first guests, as I think I mentioned to you on this podcast, was an ex-Blippar. I don't know what the what the verb for that is. Like Tara Lou's Reddy. So she, again, you know, she went out and she, you know, her whole vision was to build games that, you know, were not available to her as a young female gamer, right? Like, and I think, you know, Love Shark, she attempted to do that. And equally, I think, you know, it's sort of one of these things where no ideas are wrong. They're often just too early, and maybe at the time the market wasn't quite ready for what it was that you were trying to do. I really love that idea of Shazam being the ear of the phone, Blippar trying to be the eyes of the phone. I think that makes a huge amount of sense. But actually, for me, the thing that really has always caught my attention with AR, VR, etc., is the potential for education, right?
Yeah, I was always excited about that as well.
But it never stuck. So do you, like, any thoughts on why? Because it feels like that would have been the natural kind of destination for that sort of technology, right?
Yeah, I agree. I continue to think it's a great thing. I mean, I have, in full disclosure, been out of that industry for a while.
Sure.
There might be some brilliant use cases of it, but I love the idea of a kid being able to sort of move around the solar system, you know, or the human body, you know, being able, I used to talk about these potential applications all the time. I think one of the challenges is, obviously in the UK, and the same problem that health technologies struggle to get into the NHS is, you know, when you're selling to the public sector, it's very, very hard to get innovation
fragmented,
in and adopted.
Long sales cycles, low budgets.
You know, it's taxpayer money ultimately, and very few runways can last the time frame that it takes to actually get past the trial situation and embedded within a system. So I don't know. I hope there's some brilliant ed tech entrepreneurs innovating using AR, and I'm sure there are.
Yeah, no, there certainly are. I've come across a few, but nowhere near kind of the exposure that I would have expected, right? Like, I mean, I think, again, so you had this sort of thing with EdTech where the MOOCs, which were really just sort of digitizing content rather than delivering content differently. And I think that's where the promise of AR potentially, as you said, existed, right? Are you able to actually send or allow people to access content in a different way and experience it in a different way, rather than, you know, essentially just being talked at or having like a video lecture. But it doesn't feel like we've moved much on from that. I spoke to a really great founder working on AR, Volta XR actually, which is, it's gone through a whole number of pivots, but right now it's sort of allowing for large events to have to allow consumers to have more experience outside of being physically present at the events, which, you know, again, it's kind of juxtaposes against what we're going to talk about with ScrollAware. But, you know, if you aren't able to afford to go to the Super Bowl, or you aren't able to afford to go to, I don't know, the Taylor Swift concert, is a way of being able to interact online with those sort of things. And I think, you know, to an extent, that could be quite positive from the perspective of allowing people to build community and be involved in events that they wouldn't
Totally
otherwise
agree. I
want
love
to.
VR. And VR and AR often got lumped in the same sentence.
I
yet they
do that myself.
They are very, very different technologies.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't actually see a place for phone-based AR within the classroom.
Okay.
Because I don't think the phone should be in the classroom.
Yep.
There's no reason for a phone to be in the classroom.
Yeah.
And this was one of the sort of growing uneases that I felt there was, you know, I actually didn't want to put the phone between us and our real world experience unless there was a real value in doing so, because you're unlocking something that was going to inform or, you know, educate you in some way that you couldn't have accessed without that action. Whereas VR, is an opportunity to travel to different worlds.
Yeah.
You know, that is, and in actual fact, VR is being used within the classroom. My children have had some fantastic VR-based lessons, which I think is fantastic, because that is really a way of, you know, capturing their imaginations in an incredibly experiential way that, you know, we've never had the medium to do previously. Time travel, you know, I'm a historian, ironically, for Tech Inventor, and you know, the possibility of us being able to create a time machine is something that I still think is just wonderful. I would love that.
I was thinking about this recently, actually. So I used to, when I was, because my parents have just sold their house, so a lot of memories growing up there. And one of the things I used to do, I again, similarly, I love history, and I just love learning generally. But I used to subscribe to one, you know, those, you know, you get them once a month, and there's a book and there's some activities that you do or whatever. And one of them I remember was all about kind of historical events. And there was this tape that I used to listen to again and again, where it was describing, you know, a Christmas in medieval times, that sort of things, and you know, the very puritanical kind of the way it was sort of approached. And I remember immersing myself in that, but that was like literally just audio, me listening and using my imagination. To your point, today you could have that audio coupled with the imagery. I mean, I think it's absolutely phenomenal. But what I really want to talk about, and you know, this is obviously where you're spending your life now, and you kind of really described it well when you said how you think about removing the phone as an intermediary, right? Because you've gone from building these sort of attention engines, and you were essentially like a CMO, right? Like your kind of core role was within marketing, but you've moved from that to campaigning against the kind of addiction economy. And you know, you're a self-described gamekeeper turned poacher.
Other way around.
Poacher turned gamekeeper. Yeah, that's
now
right.
I'm the gamekeeper.
Now you're the gamekeeper, right?
I'm
so you're
trying to be a gamekeeper.
Poacher turned gamekeeper. Yeah, sorry, that's right. And so for you, where is the line between what's engaging and value additive versus extractive, right? And importantly, what do you see as the cost, whether that's societal, whether that's, you know, financial, when companies start crossing that line?
Okay, that second question is huge.
Yeah.
The first is quite simple, you know, and I find myself having to say this at the beginning of every single meeting that I'm having where Scholarware is concerned. I am pro-tech. I love tech. I'm not anti-tech. I'm not anti-phone. I'm not even anti-scroll. You know, I believe tech is the most incredible enabler. And, you know, good tech is tech that makes our life easier, more efficient, more connected, more delightful in some way. And I think most technology companies have one or other of those ambitions. You know, they are solving a problem or creating a more delightful opportunity in some way. That's good tech, and that is most tech. I think the line that we then cross is where tech seeks to become a destination for our lives. That's the distinction. And I think that is very much what has happened over the last 8 to 10 years. You know, and it's wrapped up in a business model, right? You know, the attention economy, which ostensibly on launch looked like it was sort of democratizing access to all the content in the world and enabling people to connect, you know, all over the world, like to sell products all over the world.
One of the main sort of lines in any pitch deck is still democratizing access. Like, I mean, it's still stuck, right? Yeah.
Exactly. But inherent in that model is, you know, growth, right? Yeah. And in order to get more growth, you know, you need more and more attention. And, you know, at first, that growth came from numbers of users. But as we approached a situation where most people were now on these platforms, growth then only comes from time. And this is why we have got to the situation that we've got at, where it's definitely a net negative for the world and for society. And it is not an attention economy anymore. It is an addiction economy. It is not social media now. It is algorithmic media. You know, less than 15% of the content that people see within these platforms is from friends or people that they know. You know, and it is designed to addict us very, very specifically. And to do so, it has to appeal to our most base instincts as humans, right? whether that's our desire to be right, and the tribal nature of the content that we get delivered, which has ultimately led to this now being a post-truth world. I'm being fed algorithmic content that is anti-tech at the moment, that tells me all the evil things that tech are doing. And I'm like, wow, I've never seen that report before. Who's the researcher in that report that's talking about how time is speeding up and our attention has disappeared? The report doesn't exist. When I actually go to look at that report, that researcher doesn't exist. This content is being almost created, personalized to my potential
and
prejudice.
even more so in a world of AI where like literally anything can be created by anyone at any point, right?
Absolutely. So that desire, that confirmation bias is a huge problem. You've then also got outrage. We kind of like feeling outraged, if we're honest, as people, and that ties into the tribalism, and the dopamine of silliness. We like distraction and funny things. But of course, it keeps us then. I mean, the amount of content that we are consuming now on a weekly basis is more than our grandparents would have consumed in a whole year. And what that has created is a society now that is permanently overwhelmed and constantly distracted. And without even realizing, boredom is extinct. It's extinct. People don't even take a shit with their own thoughts anymore. That is where we've got to. And yet time in our own heads is sanity. That's where we do our processing. That's where we make sense of the experiences that were happening. It's where uncertainty sits. And we're not happy with uncertainty anymore. We walk around with the weight of the world on our shoulders because of the diet of gloom and doom that we're fed. And yet the vast majority of us can do nothing about that. So we just sit with those fears, which then stifles optimism, that stifles creativity. And as adults, we recognize these tendencies. And I certainly do. That's why I'm working in this, because I've got 73 open tabs on my laptop at the moment because I can't finish a PDF report. And I open up another article, and I'll come back to that.
To read on a computer.
Yeah, and I'll come back to that, and I'll come back to that. And I don't, because I'm constantly distracted. I recognize that hyper optimization. We got a dog last year, and every dog walk I would have to listen to a podcast, got to ingest information. And then I just thought, no, actually, I'm just going to walk with my own thoughts. And since I started doing that, the difference in my state of mind when I start my working day, because without even realizing, my brain has sort of organized itself. So I know when I sit down at my desk, what is my priority. So I've been trying a lot of these techniques for myself, and it's made me even more fearful about how little people understand about this,
and whether they recognize that there's even a problem. Like they're sort of sleepwalking into the issue. Everybody
is, and even when people know it, they struggle. This stuff is powerful, addictive stuff. It is more addictive, I think, even than nicotine. It's terrifying.
I can attest. So I mean, like, so I was just nodding away vigorously there for like a number of reasons, right? So I think my daughter was diagnosed with ADHD a year or two ago, and I was reading through. I was like, "Oh, okay, fine, tick, 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 tick. This sounds like me." And so, whilst I haven't been diagnosed, I'm pretty sure I have the traits. And everything you described is exactly kind of how I was living my life, right? Like permanently distracted, perpetually sort of overwhelmed. But equally unable to kind of break free of those barriers. But what I started doing was bringing very, very analog routines into my life. So I run every day. I walk every day. If I can walk outside, I'll walk outside. If I walk, I walk without my headphones in, which I, again, would have walked with podcasts or music or whatever. But even if I've run listening to music or a podcast, I'll then try and do the walk, which is almost always as long as the run, without anything, right? So I'm just on my own. But even then, I still knew that I was having these dopamine sort of peaks and troughs and crashes and so on. And so ironically used AI to kind of figure out, okay, what can I do to do a bit of a digital detox? And so for the last week, and actually this is one of the reasons this is super interesting for me right now, for the last week, literally changed one thing. So my routine in the morning would often be just before I did my run, I'll read my emails, and specifically I send myself a newsletter every evening, and my WhatsApps, that's fine. But then I would go straight onto Twitter or X, and then LinkedIn, where I'm very active, certainly on LinkedIn. And I stopped doing that for a week, just stopped opening those apps up in the morning and didn't open them up until like midday or whenever. And actually just that change in my mood and my attitude in the morning was immense. And now I'm back to doing the same thing again. So I'm like, okay, fine, I've got to do this more regularly. But the things, again, that I think are really like, again, resonate hugely, and I think we all need to try and do more of is this getting back to boredom. Like when I was out in Papua New Guinea, I'd be, staying in the house I was staying at. We'd often, have massive power cuts, no gen set, no TV. So there's, nothing is working. So you are just forced to sit there and think, right? And I think that sitting there and thinking is immensely valuable. The second thing, whilst this is still digital to some extent, I bought one of these e-writers because typing, and I see it when I write my journal, if I type my journal, it becomes almost like I did this, then I did this. It's like a timeline of my day. Whereas when I write physically, my mind is doing all sorts of other stuff. And I used to love writing and I love reading, but yeah. And I guess my point with all of this is when I look at my kids, they're not doing any of that. Right. And they are on their phone, or they're watching YouTube, or they are on their phone whilst watching YouTube, et cetera. And they don't have the awareness because they've grown up with this. And my kids are relatively old already, because they've grown up with this. They don't necessarily, that barrier is fungible. And whilst they may recognize some of the harms, they're okay. When I look at sort of younger nephews and nieces, I mean, geez, there's a 2-year-old nephew of my wife's who literally iPad and phone, like that's it.
The evidence is now incontrovertible.
Yeah.
It started with Jonathan Haidt's book The Anxious Generation, but there's literally another report that comes out every week. It is primarily culpable for the rise in anxiety and mental health issues in young people, the loss of concentration and focus that they have, and just this general sort of negativity. But the way I've referred to it perhaps a little bit over dramatically as the lobotomization of a generation, because I do believe that is the case. What we're effectively doing is turning a whole generation into non-playing characters, the NPC, and it will fall along socioeconomic lines. That's what people are failing to realize as well. That all of the education and awareness around the harms of smartphones on children. Firstly, it's focused very much on specific harms, which are dreadful. Suicides that happen, and sextortion, and bullying, and self-harming videos and things like that. There's some awful harms, but we over focus on those as opposed to the time opportunity cost. And the impact on attention, because that's affecting all of them, right? That's 100% of children that are spending an average of 4 to 5 hours a day on these platforms. Just think of what else they could be doing with the 4 to 5 hours a day. People, place, nature, sport, art, culture, reading. Reading's fallen off a cliff. And of course, reading is the best brain training a child can do when it comes to going deep. But what is happening is that those parents that have woken up to this, if we take the tech entrepreneurs who won't let their own children do it at the top of that tree, this messaging is percolating down to the professional class, as you might imagine. If you look at things like the smartphone-free childhood movement, it tends to be middle-class professional parents that have gone, holy crap, we need to, be much more rigorous.
Or private schools who are equally sort of...
and those are the first schools who have taken the phones out of the classroom, which, by the way, when they do, everything improves overnight. That's how instant a fix it can be for bullying in the classroom, concentration, attainment scores go up, and that arguably has been Jonathan Haidt's biggest win to date, is getting the school system to wake up, because every school can act independently on this. And they've already realised that a policy that says you're not allowed to get your phone out of your bag is not is not good enough. It has to be off person and or locked bell to bell, not in the classroom.
And yet, and this is what gets me, there are parents, very educated parents, who will argue that is like almost a human right that you are removing from their child, which is
I think now that the evidence is mounting, that people are increasingly realizing it's not about liberty. This is exactly the same as all the other things where we put protections in place for children, right? Smoking, gambling, drugs, driving, age certifications on films. They're all of those things nobody would deny were the right things to do.
Some people will, but yeah, sure.
Very few. Yeah. And I think this is exactly the same situation and scenario. One of the risks is, in a world that is now devoid of nuance, the phone itself has got blamed for everything. It's not the phone, it's the content and its specific applications on the phone that are the problem.
And it's also us. So I'm still a massive believer that humans have agency, right? Like, I think putting the blame either on the phone or on the software, and I'm by no means arguing that those aren't harmful or aren't addictive or don't carry with them risks, but our agency as human beings to put the phone down or to tell our kids to put the phone down still exists. I think there is an element, and certainly with parents of young kids, where it's so much easier to let them have the iPhone because they're not going to throw the tantrum, or, you want to have a nice meal in a restaurant and that keeps them sort of clammed up for the 40 minutes that you want to sit and talk.
It's called the Square pair, and I have also been guilty of using it.
Well, there you go. Right. Yeah. And so I think culpability sits to varying degrees with all of us, right? Like in how we approach this entire topic. Because I think it would be way too easy. And of course, in Europe, we have this whole, meme about how we overregulate everything, right? But it would be all too easy to say that this is the government's responsibility or someone else's responsibility. But I think that responsibility sits with all of us, because we are the people that are buying the phones for ourselves or our kids, and we are the people that are downloading the app. So I think it's awareness about, and to your point, I haven't read The Access Generation, but I think I will now. But the more people can understand the direct and indirect harms, then hopefully the more likely it is that they are going to, take the time to figure out what might be a more, a better environment or for the kids to use them. But again, I would also agree with you that it tends to be middle class or upper middle class. Like we have more ability. We can take our kids skiing, for argument's sake, right? If they're on a ski
slope. They've got gardens to play in.
Exactly.
Or there's extracurricular clubs and things. Because the other big argument that Jonathan makes that nobody really has picked up on is you can't just say, take the devices away. You've got to also say, and replace with what?
Do this.
And concurrently, we've seen the decline of all the sort of facilities that children, and a shift in parenting culture where children aren't given independence now at an early age. We consider that they're not allowed to go out to parks from a young age. The high street has died. There's no youth clubs anymore. There's 10% of, there's only 10% of the budget for youth clubs now than there was 10 years ago. That's how quickly it's fallen. So we've got to do both things concurrently. The culture has to shift around this. And with Scrollaware, I've decided to focus very much on the adult education around what's happening here, because I think the route to the parenting conversation is through getting parents to acknowledge their own weakness, addictions and susceptibilities. Because when we acknowledge the problems that we have, we're much more likely to think, oh, Christ, if I'm struggling to discern fact from fiction here, and I'm being fed this very sort of manipulated version of something that I want to hear, and then what is my kid being fed? And we need to explain to parents that, there aren't any paedophiles in parks anymore. You'd need to leave your child outside for 150 million years, I think, for the probability of them to be stolen by a paedophile in the real world. They're all on the internet. Many of them are in the Roblox game that they're playing. And there is no blame here. And I think that's you see the smartphone free childhood movement has become quite polarizing. As somebody with young children, it's considered a bit preachy, a bit holier than thou. And the problem is that any inference that you are doing anything to harm your child is obviously going to be met with a huge reaction of disgust or denial. Of course it is.
I know what I'm doing. They're my
how
kids.
dare you
yeah.
kind of judge my
Don't lecture
parenting
me.
on the basis of the decisions that I've made? And of course, a lot of parents have been caught at the junction of older children have already got a phone, younger child's now coming through, and the parents, the peers of the younger child are saying, we're not going to give a phone. You're like, oh, crap. I can't not give them a phone because I gave my 13-year-old one when he was 10.
Yeah.
And so, you can understand why there's so much emotion around this. But to be fair to all parents, we didn't know. It's only now that we're starting to appreciate and that the evidence is coming out. And even within there's so much nuance. A lot of people, I think, at the school gate would say that, oh, Jess is one of those mums. She's anti-phones. I'm not. My son has a smartphone.
Yeah.
But why does he have a smartphone? And we should come on to talk about this from a venture perspective, because I've tuned into the innovation within the space.
Yeah.
And there's some brilliant entrepreneurs that are solving this exact problem. They are creating safer technology tools that take children on a journey with that technology, as opposed to handing them a supercomputer at the age of 9 or 10.
Do whatever you want.
Yeah. So my son has one of these new phones, a brilliant company called Wingio, who I've advised and spent a lot of time with. It's a Samsung. So he doesn't feel in any way,
left out
with his friends.
Or a loser.
But there's nothing on it.
Yeah. It's like, what is it? Was it the one phone? I mean, there's a few of these,
There's
right?
a few, and there's a lot of innovation, and it's really good innovation. And they're all trying slightly different approaches, and it remains to be seen kind of which ones will work. But the point is, it gives control to the parent. So my son has phones and calls and texts, obviously. He has Google Maps, because I really want to empower his independence. Yeah. He's got his Go Henry card, through which, and through the app, I can give him tasks and chores and jobs, pay him for those, financial management, very important. He has Wikipedia, because
access to
information, a bit nerdy, and he has Spotify because he loves music, and I really want to empower that love of music. The only annoying thing about Spotify is they don't have parental control, so I can't turn off video. And of course, Spotify is now moving into a video platform where he can waste time, because I deliberately not put anything on that phone that he can waste time on, he can open up and just...
So there's no YouTube, there's no
internet browser.
Yeah.
So he can't even go on the web, and search up a web page. If he sees a link on Wikipedia, he can't click out of Wikipedia to it.
Wow, okay.
So there's no web browser. And these have to be new devices, because you can't reverse hack the old devices. And this is one of the challenges parents have, because a kid's first phone is often a repurposed old handset of theirs. So you can put all the parental controls on you like, but ultimately you're just playing whack-a-mole and as soon as they understand how to go to a VPN URL, you're fucked, basically.
Yeah, I'm really glad you raised Wingio. I'd not come across them, but I was going to ask, because I think, exactly to your point, the hardware and the OSs are now able to there are things that can be done. But let's move on to that whole question, right? Because if to an extent, parts of big tech are starting to smell and rhyme with big tobacco, right? Like they're almost sin products. How should founders and VCs, behave, right? Is there a thesis that works for tech that fixes tech? And, I think both of us have probably seen loads of these. I remember seeing, this is probably about 7-8 years ago, someone who was building a social network for people who'd been bullied on social networks. And I was like, can you not see the inherent flaw in this argument and why this maybe doesn't work? But these are the places where the real revenue is, in IRL community, filters, Faraday moments, that true movement to analog. And what are the KPIs that prove that human benefit instead of sort of monthly active users? Or how can we tell that those are the right KPIs? And what are the red flags that maybe scream that it's just another bit of snake oil?
We're in a messy middle land right now. I think the broader macro point is, ethics has to be front and center of all these sorts of investments. How we've got to this situation of effectively having a technopoly where 7 or 8 companies are now, and the C-suite of those companies are more powerful than any politician and any government in the world. They are. And, they shape our opinions, they shape our actions, our activities, our politics, the infrastructure and our utilities. Everything is shaped by 7 or 8 companies. And the power that they have over the politicians means, it's difficult to know what happens here. And that was because there was no deep ethical, governance that happened in the pace of growth. And we're about to make exactly the same mistake with AI. So the first thing I would implore is for ethics to be at the heart of any AI investments that are made right now. And there's a lot of debate around that, but it's thrown around as a word, and then it's a little bit like, oh God, this is too complicated. I don't even know where to start on this. And it's it's above my pay grade.
But this is also why
really
you have
understand.
philosophy PhDs being hired in to these AI companies precisely for that reason.
Yeah,
right?
and I've been saying that for a long time. I think sort of the chief philosophy officer is a really important hire, and I think that VCs should take a similar approach to that, right? Because whilst we can't look around corners, some of this stuff was inevitable. And Tristan Harris, who's the lead of the Centre for Humane Tech, he's the guy behind The Social Dilemma, and he's now really coming out swinging. He's just been on Bartlett's podcast, which I was listening to in the car on the way here. He was ringing the bell on this stuff in 2013. And everyone was like, oh yeah, you make a good point. They don't know anything about it, because how can they? That's the business model. They can't start charging for this technology, once they've got everyone in it.
There is an entire book, Hooked, which kind of gives you the roadmap for how to do it, right? That was kind of the Bible for many founders and companies that were trying to get into that economy.
I was listening to The Rest is Entertainment that was talking about this, and Marina Hyde was saying that
there's another The Rest is. Geez, these guys keep throwing up.
That one's doing really, really well.
Yeah.
She was saying that one of the problems is a lot of these technology inventors, and this is happening with Sam Altman and in AI, is they have no cultural depth whatsoever. They have no appreciation of sort of art and humanity and history and human psychology and all of the things that make life worth living and a rich life. They want to solve everything, and yet the danger with that is that you forget that work and using our brains and creating is what gives humans purpose.
They're trying to solve the human condition without realizing that the human condition is
exactly, that's our purpose in life. To want to create, to want to have purpose, to want to build, to want to work. And if we automate all of this, that we really will be approaching, what was that Disney film with all those fat people that don't do anything, the blob people that just sit there and watch TV the whole time.
My kids are too old, so I'm not sure which one.
I can't remember. I've got to remember what that is, because it was very prophetic. That was a real, it was a bloody Disney film, and yet it's the most dystopian view of what the world could look like.
There's a quote. So one of my guests who's coming in next week, he was the ex-president CFO at SoftBank, so very, very close to Masayoshi Son, and very involved in a lot of the stuff they did. But his book is really interesting because he thinks about some of this stuff throughout the book. But one of the closing things he says, and I'll mangle it because I don't have it right in front of me, but he goes, our humanity and some of the absurdity of our humanity is maybe our last our last sort of opportunity to battle the encroachment of AI, i.e., and what he was saying, and again, as I say, I probably mangled it completely, but that creativity and the absurdity that humans can bring to some of that creativity is actually where our edge is over the slop that I guess is being created today. And I whether or not Sam Altman or Elon Musk or whatever, or whoever have this appreciation for that wider thing, what you can certainly see is that whatever their appreciation always morphs into their interpretation of the appreciation. So to your point, they try and solve everything through the lens that they come at it with, rather than necessarily using the lens of humanity, which is 8 billion people, all with like quite varying sort of understandings of how the world works and operates and their place in it.
No, I totally agree. And we can't predict everything, but we can. One thing that depresses me so much about the situation we're in is that everybody knows that things are fucked, but nobody knows what to do about it. And yet there are opportunities for them to come together. I mean, my professional life at the moment is spent with doors flying open everywhere of going, oh, scroll aware, this sounds great, and I've become a therapist where I get everybody talking about their own bad habits, their fears for their children, the way they hate seeing the world around them and faces turned down and the disconnection and the lack of engagement and the concentration of their staff and everything. Moan. And at first I'd go, I know, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then I'd just let them talk because I'm like, they're doing my pitch for me, keep them going. And then I was saying, right, so what are we going to do about it professionally? Because you spend X billion, on this platform. You employ 100,000 people, who you could be having this conversation with. And getting them to jump the chasm when there are so many vested interests in not
if we
rocking
do this,
the boat.
then we might have to. Yeah,
it's really, really hard. And that's not good enough anymore. I saw the CEO of Stephen Bartlett's team last week on LinkedIn, and she said something like, as a human, the fact that 37 billion hours a day are taken out of society by scroll is terrifying. But as a business person, you need to get yourself some of those hours. And I was like, how is as a human so diametrically opposed to as a business person?
Yeah.
And in all the conversations I'm having, even influencers, the biggest influencers now are really struggling with this morally, because they built these huge platforms and they're trying to inspire people to take up their hobbies, whether it's cooking or fitness or business building,
But actually they need to have them sitting there watching it to
but they need to act. They want people to act on the content that they're putting there. But what happens is they get momentarily inspired and then, the slot machine keeps rolling.
Yeah.
And that person stays online for another 4 hours. So they're like, yes, but, don't know what to do now because I'm making money out of, the eyeballs. But equally,
I kind of want the eyeballs to be doing something else, but then I'll lose the money. So how do I?
And the people are being damaged by this. Ultimately, society is being damaged by this. The fabric of communities is being damaged by this. There's loneliness, there's depression, there's overwhelm, there's fatigue. But you're playing within the system, can't beat them, join them. And at what stage are we all going to accept that we are part culpable for this? Because we can't all hope there's going to be a white knight ride in and sort of regulate the shit out of this and make it stop. I think I say that all sounds very negative and depressing, but I do think there is hope. I think entrepreneurs provide, one answer. I'm seeing a lot of really interesting platforms coming up that are bringing the social back.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a second, so I'd love to kind of dive into that because I was going to say, you're like, that's quite a negative sort of almost dystopian kind of view of we're already too far gone. How do we pull back from that? But consumers are starting to vote with their feet, right? To your earlier point, and even more so, in my opinion, in a post-pandemic kind of era and environment where that whole vision of a fully online existence, Hopin and other platforms like that obviously have since imploded. Seems to be firmly in the rear view, but have we also, but to an extent, maybe we ditched that, but moved in a different direction. But what are the most credible kind of digital defense plays that you're seeing? What are the tools, the spaces, the protocols that are pushing people back into real life, and back into that kind of analog existence? And equally, which ones are maybe just like a bit faddy and probably won't stick?
There's so many different pockets of innovation happening. Now, some of them are silly, apps to block apps, but they're not silly because they're brain training tools.
If they work,
exactly. Yeah. We need to break these habits in some ways. So if we have to incentivize people to get them offline, and that works, brilliant. The Opals of this world and forests, and there's lots of different apps, app blocking apps. And there's some hilarious technology, by the way, as well. 100 million people have downloaded app blocking software in the last year. That shows how much people are struggling with this and how much they want help. We've got unplugged cabins.
I love Unplugged.
Is
It's
doing
amazing.
Tremendous work there.
Yeah.
And the travel industry is waking up to that as well. The events industry is waking up to that. The number of venues now that insist on phones being checked in when they come in, so that people can actually watch the concert as opposed to through the screen of the person in front of them, which is how I saw Coldplay. Really annoying. So the old, what I call the analog industries, or in my vernacular, because my slogan is less scroll, more soul, the more soul industry, which are sports, nature, hospitality, travel, any in-person analog product wants their product enjoyed in person, right? They've got a huge opportunity right now to sell themselves as the antidote to this online overwhelm and to get involved in this narrative. Heineken did this fantastic campaign where it was social off social, where they took the piss out of all the influencers going, is it cake or is it fake? Everyone was in the pub. There were no likes, and it was just like tumbleweed for all the influencers because people had rediscovered the pub again and social life. So there's marketing messaging around this. There's the apps themselves. There's a lot of fun. There was this hilarious thing called the Methaphone, which was a piece of Perspex, which is just phone shaped. But they were selling it for like $40 or $50
with like buttons.
Because it was supposed to be the psychology. So if you patted it in your pocket. And it was a joke. Somebody created this product as a joke.
I can't even imagine that
and
working.
It sold like 100,000 versions.
I think I need one.
And it was hilarious because it would say dark mode is really dark, and really just take the piss out of stuff. But the fact that people want these things, somebody else has made a case for a phone that turns it into a £7 device, so that you stop carrying it around with you. When we've got cages where you have to lock your phone in with a padlock.
But it's so it's because we're not able,
a conversation.
And because we're not able to make that kind of very intuitive and obvious, like just put your phone somewhere else. Like I for many years now, my phone in the evenings is on charge in the living room. I don't have it in the bedroom. Never will again. Because the minute I bring it into my bedroom, I'm straight on it. So I have to force the behavior. So having a That
is, by the way, for anyone listening that struggles with this, that is the first and best hack. Just keep it out of the bedroom. At least end and start your day
100%.
In your own head. That is that simple.
I read
grey screen and turn off your notifications and whatever you like, but just that simple thing makes a huge difference. So I've got a product that it's not a business, it's more of a PR campaign for what we're doing at Scrollaware, and it's a sleeping bag for a phone.
Nice.
It's a product the world shouldn't need, but I'd love products like that to succeed themselves out of existence. That would be brilliant.
Create the behavioral change until they're no longer required.
Point of it is to virtue signal intentionality. So if you've got this sleeping bag and you put your phone in the sleeping bag and you do that very visibly around who you're with, whether it's your friends in the pub, whether it's at a dinner party, whether it's in a meeting, when you're with your colleagues, or more importantly, when you're with your children, because the one thing that's not discussed enough in the whole kids and smartphones is the example that they see in their own home, which is constant, right? And as parents, we need our devices. I love my phone. If I can't be buying birthday presents and responding to parties and lost property, as it comes in, my life would just be a dumpster truck fire. But equally, when I'm with them, I need to be with them.
Sure.
That's meal times, that's story times, that's when they've got an important bit of news or they're upset, and that's when the sleeping bag is so powerful. Because when I do that in front of them, I'm saying, right, I'm on your time now. You have my undivided attention.
It's a bit like whatever it was, the cone or the thing that they use in playgroups, but also in oh Jesus, I can't even remember. Lord of the Flies was what I was trying to think of. Right, like, so this is the thing that you used to speak, like, but
I know that reference because we read books.
Because you've read books.
We read books.
I mean,
our
like,
generation.
It's incredible. I still read books, but you know what the biggest, actually for me, and this is slightly tangential, I still read on the Kindle, but only because I read so many books, and this is not a virtue signal, because I read so many books, I cannot either afford or have the space to have like just hundreds of paperback or hardback books lying around the house. But I so much enjoy reading physical books more than the Kindle.
Me
It's
too.
it's just like 10x.
And the
difference.
virtue signal could be harnessed here as a positive for cultural change. That's how I see it. How do we make it be really cool? It's already starting. Like, you notice if somebody's reading a book on public transport now,
100.
as
But
opposed to
seeing
their
a
phone.
lot more of that
Yeah.
actually at the moment as well. Yeah.
Because it's starting to creep back.
Yeah.
And the more we can make digital balance or digital defiance or abstinence cool, that's how we shift culture.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that I've been wrestling with for a long time. How do I make this cool? You know, how do I harness the cultural icons for that Gen Z are watching? And there's some really interesting Gen Zers who I think are gonna are the hope, because they're the ones saying, actually, we resent that this has stolen our childhood. They're the ones saying that they support a social media ban for under 16s, because they've just come out of that age
And
group,
they realise
like,
how
this stole everything from us, you know, and we think it's a good idea that there is no social media. They're the ones that are getting on planes now and doing this thing called raw dogging, which used to mean something different, but
definitely used to me. Yeah.
And it
But
now
I do know what it kind of
sitting
means.
and doing apps.
Yeah,
I don't know
doing
why
nothing.
we have to rebrand doing nothing. In the same way that mindfulness, you know, I think we're rebranding jigsaws and
But I think,
reading
but it's
as
to your point.
mindfulness.
But it's to your point, how to make it cool, right? Like
Yeah.
if you can make it cool, you can make it accessible, right? Like if you say to someone, you know, get on the plane, sit without your phone, and just get bored, they'll be like, "Meh." But if you say to them, can you raw dog it on this flight? It becomes a game, right?
Yeah,
like as
yeah.
well. So it's something that they can. You know, they can tap into. It's in the language, and let's face it, language has changed as a result of the internet, so much so that, you know, every new, I mean, of course every new generation has its own slang, but that slang is like progressing and moving in so many different directions. But what I love about this whole thing, I'm like, look, so when I think about it, this podcast in itself is kind of my clap back against, you know, always online. Obviously people are consuming this online, sorry, but this is my opportunity. I get to sit in a room with like incredibly thoughtful people for an hour and a half and have a conversation, which doesn't happen, if I'm honest, right? In the same way. I mean, I stopped drinking a couple of years ago, so I don't really go to the pub or anything like that. But obviously post-pandemic, my life became Zoom calls and really virtual existence, and my business can be run virtually and all the rest of it. So actually this gives me the opportunity to actually have like human connection, but at an intellectual level as much as anything else. And that's the thing that I think equally is missing from a lot of our kids' lives, is that intellectual. So I'll give you a really great example. My daughter, bless her, is studying the IB, and she wants to study biological sciences, probably something along the lines of immunology or microbiology. Anyway, because of the subject she's chosen, it's slightly harder to get into a number of universities. So I set her up to do like 3 days work experience at one of my clients, who happens to be, you know, in the kind of tech biospace. She came back like she was incredibly enthusiastic when she came back, and like the thing she said to me, she goes, "Dad, you do not know how incredible it was to sit in a room with like really smart people and have really engaging, interesting conversations. I just don't have that anywhere else." And I'm sat there going, wow, like, because I remember at my school, we did have those. I mean, like, we talk about rubbish, of course, but we'd also have kind of deep philosophical-ish, you know, however much you can be philosophical at 16 years old. But, you know, we had those conversations both amongst ourselves and with our teachers because we could, because there wasn't anything else to do. That was the fun, right? Like, that was the enjoyment that we took out of it. And I think things like Unplugged and offline experiences, you know, going to the theater, catching up for a meal afterwards, all of these things which encourage that, you know, that really human curiosity that we all have, which is being completely, and I see it in myself, my curiosity, like the amount that I used to read versus what I read today has shifted, because I can get trapped in a hour-long Instagram, like, okay, well, this is fun. We've got, you know, if we can create the spaces where it's easier for that to happen, which is why I love doing this podcast in a studio, for example, again, because, you know, it's a very different conversation when you're sitting in front of someone versus sitting on a video screen. So just before we close off, I mean, like from your perspective, because it sounds like you're optimistic that things are changing and can change. What is the biggest shift you'd like to see, in the near term? What is if you could achieve one thing in the next 12 months, what would it be?
Oh, I'm thinking longer term than 12 months, because I think this thing has to move in baby steps.
Got it.
And it is cultural shift and cultural change that I'm going for. So on my blog, and I'll give it a plug, Antidoters, on Substack, I wrote my 2035 utopian vision, because for all the sort of doom-mongering statistics I've given you, I am an optimist.
Sure.
I believe in the power of antidotes. I believe in the power of entrepreneurs and technologists to invent a better future. And I do believe that hearts and minds can shift as well. And my utopian vision is one where we've rediscovered the joys of being human. There's this broad term I use, the more soul term. Soul is an ambiguous word, and deliberately ambiguous. But, it means going deeper within everything in your life. Your understanding, your appreciation of nature and art and culture and history, the depth of your relationships and how you engage with your community. Soul means different things to different people, but it's something to discover. And I think, we are all treading water on the superficial layer of content that everybody realizes that they've lost that. And there's this dawning sort of appreciation that we all need to just stop a little more, breathe, take a break, and hone in on the things that are more soul in our lives. And I guess what I want to do is foster that and bring about an analog renaissance in some small way alongside all the other streams of activity that are happening, regulation and education and books coming out and conversations. Reminding people what matters. It's basically perspective that we need to bring back, because that will make society happier generally. And I would love a world where getting your phone out in company becomes a little bit frowned upon, like lighting up a cigarette. And I think we will get there, because I think already people resent them.
Oh, my wife, if I pull out my phone, like I get dagger eyes, like immediately.
Because you're basically saying the possibility of what might happen on my phone is more important than the person that I'm with right now, which is just not true. Yeah. It's just not true. And we don't even think that.
No.
But we've conditioned ourselves to the what if or the maybe is more exciting than the moment and the power of now.
Yeah.
So
everyone's chasing virality, even if virality is never going to come, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It becomes... And having gone viral myself once, I know how addictive that is. Like, I was on a flight, literally kind of hooked up to shitty Wi-Fi, constantly refreshing LinkedIn, just seeing like these thousands of likes and views and whatever coming in on actually what was a relatively thoughtful post. It was like 100 lessons I've learned over the last 20 years. But actually that whole kind of dopamine rush of, oh my God, like someone else. And okay, that's one thing when you're going viral, but people are doing this to get 5 likes or 10 likes or add another friend or connection, whatever. When actually, it's that old thing, like you can count the real friends on five fingers of one hand. And those are the people that are around you. And if those people are, if you surround yourself with the right people.
It's narcissistic culture.
100%.
What you're describing is narcissism.
Oh, 100%.
It is. And we've all been inculcated in this sort of narcissism of, exposure and likes and validation.
Well, it's the 15 minutes of fame, right?
Yeah.
And also not only that, but we've been so I'm a LinkedIn top voice for whatever that means, which is really nothing.
Doesn't make you happy.
It's Jesus Christ, does it not make me happy in any way, shape or form? But the hilarious thing is, since I got it, I started just being like less feed the machine, right? Like I was like, well, actually, this is kind of stupid. And also when I post valuable content, it gets nothing. And when I post memes, like stuff happens. So, okay, whatever. But a friend of mine who also is a LinkedIn top voice got an email recently from LinkedIn saying, yeah, we've noticed you haven't posted recently. We may have to take away your top voice, you know, if you don't kind of get back in, I mean, it was couched in very different terms, but it was essentially, you know, we're gonna take away this accolade if you don't feed us, right? And I think that's the thing that,
oh wow, yuck.
yeah, exactly, right.
Ick.
And this is the thing that I think we all forget, is that we are not only the product, but we are feeding their content. We are the ones pushing their algorithms further and further, because the more we engage, the more value there is to them.
How many times when you press post have you ever done the calculation of the time it takes to watch or read whatever you've posted times the number of people that might end up watching and reading that? You know, if you do a 10-second post and 100,000 people, you know, if you multiply those together,
but yeah, get it,
and think, and just immediately think, what is the cumulative amount of time that I've just taken out of society?
Humanity. Yeah.
You know, if everyone did that, particularly on the slop end of their content, the clickbait or whatever they're doing, but nobody does that, because we're in this constant hustle, you know, got to compete, need more likes equals a book deal, equals a sponsor, equals, you know, and it's like, oh my God, it's all really gross. And I'm ending up sounding like a socialist, and I'm not. You know, I believe in the power of business and
but business doesn't need to be evil, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but we're all now feeding this machine.
Yeah,
and you know, that's so disempowering.
Yeah, and I always come back to this one thing: we all have agency, right? And we are all able to make the decisions that we believe are good for ourselves and for others. We don't need to let other people dictate. Actually, one of the most empowering things that has happened to me this last year and a half is realizing how batshit X has become, which just means I've stopped using it.
I left it, and I'm approaching there with LinkedIn, I have to say.
LinkedIn, not yet.
Not yet
for me. It's because I'm a top voice.
No,
but I actually went from posting to feed the algorithm to posting because I actually felt like posting, right? And I think that's the other thing that's super empowering. Is like when you stop doing it because you feel like you have to, like. So as part of the whole top voice thing, they put us, you know, there's 200-300 of us on a course. And the course was actually stupid, because really all the course said was post more, which was great. But this one guy got up, he goes, but like, how I need to figure out a different way. And like, what are you talking about? He goes, well, I have anxiety. So we were talking about, so someone was asking, like, how do I ensure I have a balance there, right? So someone's like, you know, actually thinking about the ethical kind of issue here. And this one guy was like, but I have anxiety deleting the app off my phone. Like, actual anxiety to delete an app that he could download again, even for a day. Anxiety deleting that app off his phone. And he's got the web that he could go to or whatever, right? But actual anxiety deleting a single app off his phone. And he said he's like checking it every 30 seconds or whatever it is. And then you know that there is an inherent problem here. But look, I want to finish up. I mean, again, I think we could talk about all of this for a lot longer, but I want to finish off with a couple of questions that I ask all my guests. This has probably been a fairly contrarian podcast in terms of most of the podcasts that I do. But what is one thing that you have a very contrarian conviction about from any area of life, whether that's work, politics, socially, or at home?
There is no way there could be a short answer to that. So if anyone Googles me, they'll see where my contrarian opinions lie. I got in a lot of trouble a few years ago for a TEDx where I took aim at what I perceived to be some of the negative ramifications of the feminist narratives. And apparently my internalized misogyny was on display and all sorts.
Excellent.
The TLDR version of that is that I don't accept binary, oversimplistic narratives where any of this stuff is concerned, and I don't accept a culture that seems to encourage victimhood. So those are...
We could be siblings.
And those were my issues, but I had some of those quotations cherry-picked out of context. And
because that's what the attention economy does, right?
Article in the Guardian about how I was an awful person, and I got rapidly uninvited from every women's networking event and awards thing that I'd been involved in. Subsequently, I think the pendulum has shifted a little further back to some of my own thinking on that. I probably did some of the sound bites probably weren't, great, but this was a different time and a different era. So yeah, I'm less binary in everything these days. The older, the wiser I get, the less strongly I hold any position, and the more suspicious I am of anybody that holds strong positions. The most activists know less about the issue that they're marching on than the average member of society, which is such a fascinating and terrifying, worrying indictment on where we are. And again, I put the culpability at the door of the attention and addiction.
Well, it's because
economy.
everyone thinks that they can be an expert today, spending 30 seconds online. I mean, it's essentially what you've described as strong opinions loosely held, right?
Yeah.
Which I am a massive proponent of, right? Like, one of the things that really gets me in the UK today is where our political discourse has gone, which has become incredibly binary. You're either for this or anti that.
Exactly. Life is a battle between good and evil. Of course it's not. That line runs through every single one of us.
And this, the weird thing for me politically is, like, I am literally politically homeless. There is not a single party that I can ascribe to that makes sense to me, because there are tiny bits from there, or a bit more from there, or a little bit from here, but none of them have a coherent platform that works for me. But, and again, this is the online problem, is that the debates get taken down to their absolute sort of straw man of one position. And therefore, if you're with us, you're here. If you're not, you're there. But nuance needs to be brought back. But nuance happens in conversations.
That's why podcasts are long awesome. I agree.
100%. And finally, so we can get to know the real you, although I think we kind of probably already have. What is something that moves you emotionally?
So many things, human things. People love. It's a trite answer, but serendipitous moments when strangers connect, or you see the humanity in a stranger. I guess that's when I'm one of these people that weeps at films and sometimes reels. Those reels of returning soldiers. Oh my god,
I'm the same. 100%
they get me every single time.
Or even or even when it's the Royal Guard or whatever it is outside Buckingham Palace, and they an autistic child comes up close. Like, that stuff really hits me hard.
And this is why I'm not no scroll, because stuff like that does remind us of our humanity, right? There are so few moments where you have proper transcendence, and there are. It's always at the most unexpected times. A piece of music will take me somewhere that I hadn't expected, or a poem will just sort of pierce me. Those are the times when I experience overwhelm, and I'm very fortunate enough to have people around me, especially my partner in life, who we have those moments and share those moments together. So we encourage and seek to make more of them.
I think that's absolutely wonderful. And like completely resonates. Those are the exact things that I would probably answer myself. Jess, it's been such a pleasure having you here in the studio on this podcast with me today. This last question maybe is the wrong question to ask, but if people want to find you, where can they find you? Online or indeed offline?
Yeah, look, I've made peace with the fact that a lot of what I'm talking about at the moment, the best place for it to sit is on the platforms. Sure. I'm not a bloody idiot, So I'm trying to build up my influencer profile. You see what I've done there? So I'm trying to attract more influencers to my alliance. But where I do my best thinking is Substack. So my antidotas Substack is Jess, just thinking out loud and, observing life and problems and opportunities. And then obviously scrollaware.com is where I talk about the alliance that I'm pulling together of powerful business and individuals that care about this. And we also now have a More Soul Society, which is the digital balance Substack, where you get a very short, slow letter every Sunday that just reminds you how to be human. And
Is
it's
it a
a
physical
2
snail
to
mail
3
letter?
mail. I wish it was.
That
We're not
would be
quite there yet.
awesome.
It would be awesome.
That would be absolutely incredible.
Oh my God. I'm going to launch that.
I would love that.
Thank you.
I would
I'm
absolutely
so
love
launching
that.
that.
Please.
At the moment, it's a 2-minute read on a Sunday lunchtime,
Yeah.
and it gives you 3 or 4 ideas for things to do that week to remind yourself of your humanity.
I honestly, snail mail, please. We found when we were cleaning out my parents' house, I found a letter that my uncle had written to me when I was going to university, and it was incredible. That was still there 25 years on. The content of the letter was not so incredible. He was like trying to convince me not to study languages. Thankfully I did, because otherwise I wouldn't be doing this. But I remember that, I mean, what it actually brought back to is we used to travel to Kenya all the time, every summer, and we would write back, because my parents wouldn't be with us because they were looking after 10 of us at home at one point, right? And I actually, just thinking about like receiving a letter
it's lovely.
on a Sunday would be like just absolutely amazing.
Well, you wouldn't, though, because of the Royal Mail.
Well,
obviously, that whole industry is fucked now as well.
Well, it's been bought. Who's been bought out? It's been bought.
Well, there is no mail on Sunday.
Yeah.
But equally, it would take a week to arrive. It's pretty expensive DM marketing strategy, I fear.
I think we need to solve this. But anyway, Jess, it's been
Would love to.
such a pleasure
I've so
having you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you
for
so
having
much.
me.
No, really appreciate it. Thank you, and have a wonderful Christmas.
You too. Thank you.